Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Budget 3.0 has finally been released. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the changes made and what this means for growth. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
Firstly, what does Budget 3.0 tell us about the budget setting process?
I think the main message is that it can't be business as usual. We're in a new environment politically where there's a government of national unity. There's going to be coalitions, I think, going into the future. There has to be a different level of consultation across political parties. It's not a sort of closed shop. There's a very rigid and sort of complex and long-winded budget setting process, and it is consulted, but it's always been within the sort of official structures. And I think what this has taught us is that it has to also include a consultation process with political parties that now either form part of government, and even those that don't. They were also quite crucial in getting to the point where I think we are going to pass a budget for this year. So I think that's the main message, that it can't be approached the way we did when there was one big majority party and there was a discipline around that party in a way. The budget, even when there was unhappiness internally, there was generally a discipline that would hold. That's no longer the case, and we need to change the way we consult and the manner in which the cabinet approves this budget.
As expected, the VAT hikes have been withdrawn, but there are still tax implications.
Yes, the VAT hikes, as we know, led to the breakdown in the discussion between the Finance Minister and different political parties. It was initially flagged in the February budget review, which was never tabled, so the speech was never made. Then we had the March speech and the tabling of the budget, and even there was a pushback, both political pushback as well as legal pushback against that, and there was a few that this budget needed to be amended without VAT increases. So those have been withdrawn entirely, along with the extended list of zero ratings. So that's gone. But what has been included, and it won't be popular, is the big change to the fuel levy, because we haven't had increases to the fuel levy for a number of years. And now that's embedded another 15 and 16 cents on petrol, diesel and petrol respectively, coming in quite soon. And those, will have an inflationary impact. I think I suppose the good part of the timing is that oil prices have been a bit under pressure and the rand has been strengthening somewhat. So that may offset the immediate impact of the fuel levy, but it's there. And it adds to that load, the tax load, and it won't go away easily. So that's a big downside. The other thing is not to be making these inflation adjustments to personal income taxes and medical aid contribution. Those are big contributions to why they were able to raise taxes during this period. So those are two, and they look like they're embedded for the next 3 years. If you look at the outlook, they expect not to make any bracket adjustments for personal income tax. So that remains a drag on taxpayers. So that's also embedded. And we're also told that it's not enough. So another 20 billion rand is going to need to be found in the next budget 2026. So we'll obviously have to get some signals in the medium-term budget policy statement as what the tax implications will be exactly.
More resources have also been given to SARS to try and collect more taxes that are due.
So to offset that 20 billion, a lot of store is being put in to SARS being more efficient in getting what's owed to it. So already we've seen projects underway under SARS as it is within its funding envelope to have more debt collection. And that's been quite effective. I think about 95 billion in arrears was raised. Now there's a process of giving SARS over the next 3 years about 7.5 billion rand to beef up its capacity of tax administration and improve the efficiency. And already quite a few hundred debt collectors have been added to the staffing at SARS. So there's going to be this more aggressive, approach to those who are delinquent and getting those fees back in. Now, the Commissioner set a target of 120 billion, so 95 billion in the last year, 120 billion for next year. That's not reflected in any way in the figures at this stage. So that might reduce that 20 billion tax burden that is being signalled. But that's also, it depends very much on that actually playing out as expected or as what is desired around that. But it's a big play, and the Commissioner has made it clear that this is what he thinks is possible, and he was against the VAT hike, so now he has to deliver.
There is also a commitment to acting on spending reviews.
Yes, I think that was the other big theme of this budget, other than getting rid of the tax hikes, and then obviously the sort of headline number of, the debt to GDP ratio really worsening again, 77.4 record sort of level, higher peak than we wanted. And there'll be a lot of attention to whether that is really the peak. Next year, have we really peaked in that ongoing deterioration in the debt to GDP ratio, and sort of 22 cents in every revenue rand raised having to go to debt servicing costs. So it was a big theme, along with that we need a different approach to the budget setting that we spoke about earlier. We've had a number of spending reviews since 2013. They looked at programs that involved like 300 billion rands worth of expenditure, and just looking at those reviews, there was a view that about 37 billion of savings could be made through making changes or closing certain programs. And I think there's a lot of attention now is going to be actually implementing some of those spending reviews. So they've done the scientific-based analysis of whether this money is being spent properly. They found it isn't being spent efficiently. This is nothing to do with corruption or wasteful expenditure. This is about, are we spending efficiently around procurement, ICT, etc., and on programs that are on big programs. And I think now the sort of rubber needs to hit the road, and we need to see those spending reviews actually being implemented in the budget.
A brave face was put on this being a growth-enhancing budget.
Yes, I think that was difficult. We in a much more, in comparison to February, the environment's actually deteriorated for South Africa, largely external, because of the trade war threat and the impact that will have on South Africa's growth. Obviously, we're in this 90-day pause period, which will end at some point, and maybe we will have some sort of relief there as we try to reset the relationship with the US, although that's not clear at all. But if those tariffs come through at the 31% type level, it's going to be very deleterious for the South African economy. And also we had lower than expected growth in 2024, so that feeds into the base. So we've revised our growth figure down to 1.4% for this year, 2025, which is still above market expectations, well above the 1% that the IMF is forecasting for South Africa. So that's going to be, I think, a difficult ask, even though we all know that anything below 3% is just not cutting it in terms of dealing with our social backlogs, especially unemployment. But to get to 1.4% this year is a stretch target, I would say. But we'll have to see where it lands. But at the moment, we're not getting anywhere near that. So to present this as a growth budget was a difficult ask, as you say. And I think there was a message really was that firstly, we need to have our fiscal house needs to be in order as a foundational building block in growth. And I think this was about that, getting a budget, one that everyone could agree on, and also that makes sense. The numbers make sense, and they do, but they do include, as I say, higher growth than many are forecasting. That doesn't expect a lot from SARS in terms of revenue collection, etc. So there's unknown or imponderables in there that we have to see where they land. But it was, I think, to say this is a building block, and then the other building blocks were sort of also emphasized, which is all about the reforms that we are sort of pursuing around private sector participation, largely in the network industries. The electricity, we've already seen a lot happening there, but we're now looking at integrating private sector into the grid, private sector participation into rail, both on operating rail, so having third-party access to the rail network, but also I think more and more in the infrastructure itself. There's an RFI out at the moment, and try and convert that into tenders later, into the port system as well. Transnet's doing some capital expenditure, but we need much more in the port system through the private sector participation. And as well as the message that, yes, we will help Transnet out. It wasn't in the initial budget text, but it was clearly stated that if Transnet needs to get more guarantees to refinance its debt, some of it which is maturing, and there was a sort of a note that came out from one of the ratings agencies about that, Transnet running out of money. I think that was also an important signal. And so there was this message that we need this fiscal house in order. We've got this reforms program, but there was also the other counter message that there's a lot of spending needs that, that are going to come our way and that aren't in this budget at the moment. The PEPFAR, which is the AIDS money that comes for AIDS relief from the US, has been cut. We have to find money for that. There's election coming. And because of the rules around political party funding, the government has to make some money potentially available for political party funding. And we know we're entering election season with a municipal election round coming up. So there's all these spending pressures, not only Transnet, not only Eskom, that are bubbling under. So it's going to be a difficult balancing act still. And the credibility is all going to be whether we have actually peaked in our debt to GDP ratio. It's high peak, very high peak, 77.4%. But is that really going to be the peak, or are we going to see another slippage in 2026? So I think we're still at the sort of the end of the beginning here, as in terms of the credibility of the budget.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News daily email newsletter.